I'm still wondering who sent that email. It wasn't that I hadn't noticed a change in my wife over the last month or so, but there had been a change. Jen seemed moody and less outgoing than usual, and I attributed it all to her new job after her promotion. I tried to talk about it, but she brushed me off. And frankly, I was under my own pressure at the time. I had just signed a new contract that I hoped would lead to a big leap in my chosen career. And then came the email, an email that explained to me more or less clearly what the problem was, and not only what the problem was, but who exactly had created it. It had to be nipped in the bud. I hoped it wasn't too late. At least now it made sense why Ian wouldn't talk to me about it. His name was Norman Holder, and he was a senior manager at the company Jan worked for. It didn't take me long to realize that he was indeed the manager that Jan now reported to. A good-looking guy, if, unlike me, you like men, and at 6 feet tall, he towered over my petite wife and over me, too. Okay, I'm far from the biggest guy in the world, but that doesn't make me soft. The letter warned me against confronting Jan about the evidence presented to me, and that was something I had to accept, as the line had undoubtedly been crossed. Jan had a social event planned for the company executives, and I had already made it clear that I couldn't take time off work to go with her. Oh well, that was then and this is now anyway, and I was going. I'm going to keep my eyes open to see if what's going on between Holder and my wife is true or not. If it is, blood may well be spilled. Yeah, that's what I meant. I wonder who the hell sent the damn letter. I've decided to go to the company dance tomorrow, I announced out of the blue. You don't have to, Tom, Jen replied, only a little too quickly for my liking. You have other things to worry about right now. Nothing more important than my wife, I insisted. It's not really a dance, Tom, she reminded me. You'll be bored to tears. Are spouses invited? I asked, knowing the answer. You know they're invited, Jen had to admit. And most of them will go? I think so, she had to admit. But they're really not your sort. Are you ashamed of me, Jen? God, of course not, Tom, she replied, almost with tears in her eyes. Then I'm leaving, Jen. End of discussion. I certainly didn't have the education and training that most of the men who would be attending this evening had, but I had combed my hair well enough. I even had a suit. As it turned out, I had several of them, and good ones at that. Not that I wear it to work, of course. I work with my hands, and it would hardly be appropriate. I was dirty and sweaty at work and took a couple days off just for that. My manager wasn't thrilled with me, but when I explained to him what was going on, he eventually relented. Admittedly, not right away, suggesting that I settle, and not without his strong warnings not to do anything stupid, as if I would do just that, and so Ian and I dressed up. I looked a lot smarter than usual, and Ian looked just bloody gorgeous. She may only have 5 feet or so in her, but that's 5 feet of quality. She was still a regular at the gym where we'd first met 7 or 8 years ago, and the shape she was in was the result of keeping herself in shape. The little black number Jen wore didn't hide it too much either, and those cute high-heeled shoes almost reached my height. It didn't take long to realize who this Holder guy was, and I wondered if I was the only one who noticed how carefully Jen avoided being alone with him. Maybe not, and if I hadn't gotten that email, I probably wouldn't have either, but I wondered if it would have been the same if I hadn't been there. I tried not to push Jen and stood in the shadows while she walked around the room, introducing herself and saying hello or whatever the custom was at these events. I wondered if she'd forgotten I was there. I was just beginning to wonder if I was wasting my time when suddenly the two of them were alone on the crowded dance floor. He looked like he was the cat that caught the canary, and Jen at least looked awkward, looking around, probably trying to spot me to see if I was watching them. She was, and I didn't like what I saw. I definitely didn't like where he was trying to put his hands. I may not have liked what I saw, but in my position I had to be careful what I did. I was biding my time. But here came my time. Good evening, I began to introduce myself when I finally caught his eye. Norman Holder, isn't it? That's right, he replied cautiously. I'm sorry, you look familiar, but I can't identify who you are. From the West Country office, I told him, knowing there was one person there but nothing more, and grateful that my ploy not to follow Ian had worked and he hadn't connected us. "Hey!" he rejoiced, holding out his hand to me. "You must be Jenkinson, the new head of transitional acquisitions." "That's right," I agreed, having no idea what he was talking about and resisting the temptation to squeeze his hand as I took it. "I don't know many people here yet, but I saw you dancing with that charming blonde. Is she your wife?" "Jen Collins, you mean?" He grinned understandingly. "Not my wife, but we're starting to get to know each other." "That's just the way it is, lucky guy," I grinned, nudging him knowingly. "She's gorgeous, and what a body she has." "And what gorgeous breasts she has," he grinned, winking at me. "Did you touch them?" I asked and held my breath. It was the question I'd been preparing for so long, the confirmation I'd been looking for. For a moment, I thought he was going to lie, but he clearly changed his mind. "Not yet," he admitted, sighing loudly to show his frustration. "But I'm working on it. Give me another week and she'll be leaning over my desk yelling about it." "Playing hard to get, huh?" I asked, forcing myself to smile. "It's just a matter of time. She's new to the job and ambitious, and it's up to me to see how quickly she gets promoted." "Is she married?" "Yes," Holder replied, deciding his fate. "Her husband is some petty squish with no qualifications or anything. I don't know why she stays with him." "What does he do for a living then?" I asked him cheerfully. "I have no idea," he replied. "As I understand it, he doesn't even have a steady job. I suppose half the time he stays at home and lives on his wife's income." "And what's his name?" I asked, beginning to enjoy being assured that my wife hadn't even scratched our marriage vows and that this bastard was pursuing her against her wishes, more or less as that email suggested. "Tom, I think she calls him," he spat out. "Tom Collins, I guess." "Actually, it's Tom Black," I informed him. "Collins is her maiden name, which she uses for work." "Why would she do that?" the stupid bastard asked, still not realizing the situation he was in. "Because we agreed she would," I told him and waited for it to hit him. "What, you mean, you—" He hissed in shock. "Her husband," I confirmed calmly. "The little bugger," he laughed, finally catching the connection. "Come to beg me to give her pleasure?" "More like to teach you a lesson in behavior," I sighed. "A runt like you?" He laughed, quite correctly estimating that he was 5 or 6 inches tall and probably weighed twice as much. Then I did something truly horrible. I really wanted to provoke him in a way that wouldn't be noticeable to anyone around me. So I spat at him. "You pathetic little bastard," he shouted, jumping on me as I planned. The stupid fool recognized Jan's husband in me, but thankfully didn't think any further about it. He swung at me, and though I dodged the blow, I still let it hit, and I staggered exaggeratedly hard, stumbling backwards. If you doubt that I have this ability, you should know that my so-called part-time job gave me this skill set. "I'm going to fucking kill you!" he yelled as he followed me, waving his arms wildly. I guess he thought he was going to knock me out while I was reminding myself not to get carried away and use my fists. Satisfied that anyone watching would see that he had thrown the first punch, I began to teach him the promised lesson. Dodging his blows was too easy, and the slap I slapped him in the face was strong enough to make him stop. "Fight like a woman," he muttered and lunged at me again. Wrong! 6 slaps later, 6 hard and very fast slaps later, Holder was lying on the floor, and I, breathing hard, was standing there looking at him. "Tom, for God's sake, what have you done?" I heard my wife Jen shout as she pulled me away from him. Not that I wanted to hurt him. "So much for the first lesson," I muttered, quite pleased with myself. "You didn't have to do that, Tom," she rebuked me. "He was bugging me, but I could have handled it." "I dealt with him," I grinned. "Why didn't you tell me he was bothering you?" "I didn't want to bother you, Tom. Not right now, not with what's in store for you this month." "It's nothing, Jan," I said, examining my knuckles to make sure I hadn't hurt them. Let's get out of here. Not so fast, young man, I heard behind me, and I turned around, cursing myself for not checking to see if he had any friends to back him up. Oh, shit, I thought. So much for my promise to the manager not to get involved. Of course I was wrong. Bradley, George Bradley, a rather prominent older man introduced himself, extending his hand to me. Tom Black, I replied, taking his hand as it dawned on me that I was talking to General Sir George Bradley, military hero and boss of the firm Ian worked for. I know, he smiled, shaking my hand vigorously. I couldn't believe it was you when I walked in earlier. Now I know why your lovely wife uses her maiden name. We're pretty private people, I felt compelled to explain. We try to avoid excessive publicity for the sake of our children. Oh, how I see your point, he laughed, politely waving away the crowd gathered around us. But it's going to be even harder in a couple weeks, isn't it? If I beat him, I agreed. Of course you'll beat him, he assured me, grinning widely. To think we have a world champion's wife working for us and no one had any idea. I've yet to beat him, I reminded him. You're the best welterweight in the world, my boy, and if you doubt that, you're the only one who thinks so. That's exactly what I'm telling him, Jen whispered, and the pride in her voice was impossible to miss. That's exactly right, young lady, he grinned. Now why don't you take your husband home while I go and find out where that idiot crawled off to? Sorry about him, I felt obliged to say. I suppose it complicates things for Ian. Not at all, he muttered with a laugh. I finally have a good reason to blow off my sister's hopeless nephew without getting it in the neck. With those words, I gathered up my wife and was about to leave, only at the last moment I remembered something. Sir George, I mumbled, wondering if I had addressed him correctly. Would you like a ticket to my title fight? I already have one. Seats at ringside. Wouldn't miss it for the world, he muttered. Maybe when you become world champion, you and Ian can honor us with your presence at dinner one night. I'd love to. Ian beat me to it and escorted me out of the house, where I made the most of my time, since I really had to get back to training camp the next day. Had I won? Well, that's the story, so of course I won. And Jan got a promotion shortly thereafter, and both of our kids settled into life very well, and well, you know what it is. But just one thing kept bothering me. Who the hell had sent that letter?